Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Jerry, for that introduction. And let me thank all of you for sponsoring this event, and thank the National Press Club as well for inviting all of us here today. You're a pretty frightening group for me to speak to, because I know you know Africa as well as I do, so I'm not sure that you will learn anything from me, but I look forward in a short Q&A session in which I might learn from you. Let me start by wishing all our colleagues from the Muslim world a prosperous, peaceful, and reflective Ramadan season, which just started, and we look forward to supporting you over this next fantastic month of reflection. You have a very fantastic agenda ahead of you today, and I really wish that I could stay here for the entire day, but you would wonder what I was doing as Assistant Secretary for Africa if I stayed in this room all day long, although I think I'd probably get more out of this than some of the other things I'm planning to do today. This event is also very timely as we enter the final 7 months of the Obama administration. It's a good time for us to discuss our top priorities for those 7 months, as well as talk about the decade ahead, which is the purpose of this discussion. And I think it's an important time for us to look at what Africa will become in the next 10 years. And I'm very hopeful that Africa in the next 10 years will reach the potential that we all know that it has. So I'd like to kick off things by doing something a little backward. As Terry mentioned, you know, it's easy to hear the bad news about Africa and all the challenges. So I'd like to just start out by outlining some of the top accomplishments in Africa over the past few years of the Obama administration, and then I'll transition to key priorities and the challenges for the months and decades ahead, and if we have time afterwards, I'll take a few questions. So during this brief period in which I've been Assistant Secretary of State, we've had some major challenges, but we've seen some extraordinary successes in partnering with Africa to promote democracy, peace, and prosperity. That's the mission statement of the Africa Bureau. Everything we do in the Africa Bureau is about promoting democracy, peace, and prosperity. Now, I can expand that mission statement into a whole paragraph or even a whole page, but when it boils down, it's about ensuring democracy, peace, and prosperity for the people of Africa. So the good news, we've been very active over the past 3 years, and we've had, as I said, some major successes. At the top of this list, on the democracy front, I think you would all agree with me that Nigeria's presidential elections were a tremendous success. And it was a tremendous success because I think none of us really expected that the Nigerians could do this, that they could achieve this. But it's what the people of Nigeria were determined to do. They were determined to get out the vote. They were determined that their ballots be counted. And the candidates, fortunately, respected that. There was a lot of effort behind the scenes on our part and on the parts of our partners to ensure that the candidates accepted the results of the election. Our ambassador was very successful in getting the parties to sign peace and nonviolence commitments, and they honored those commitments. And in the end, what happened in Nigeria, I think, will go down in history. To have had not only a peaceful election, but one that was transparent and one that led to a transfer of power from the ruling party to an opposition party. In February, the Central African Republic had a free, fair, and credible and peaceful presidential election, and the results were broadly accepted. 2 years earlier, this country was in the throes of a civil war. It was considered a humanitarian disaster in the making. We were all concerned that the next genocide was on the verge of happening on the continent of Africa, and yet 2 years later, they were able to have free and fair elections. There remains a lot of work to be done to consolidate the reemergence of democracy in the Central African Republic, but the country took a big step forward this year on that front, and we're very, very hopeful about the future of Central African Republic. There are also other successful elections in Africa. I'll name a few of them. Burkina Faso, where the people stood up to the ruling party, to the president, to say, no more, we want change. And when the military decided to take over, they then said to the military, we will not accept the decision for you to take over power. They had a transitional government that delivered on a free and fair election. And again, we take a tremendous amount of pride. We didn't do it. We backed the people, we supported the effort, and that effort led to a fantastic election. And then there were others that went unnoticed: Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Namibia, just to name a few. In terms of legacy in the Obama administration, I'm regularly asked that question: what do I see as legacy? And there are a number of initiatives that I think will have staying power, but the one that I think is the most important is the President's Young African Leaders Initiative. Through YALI, we're bringing young Africans to the United States for 6 weeks of academic and leadership training. These YALI fellows are clearly Africa's future. If you have not met them, you should. And if you've met them, you would not forget that you've met them. I refer to them as Power Africa, because when you walk in the room, and there are 500, now this year 1,000 of these young people in the room, the energy is discernible. The ambitions are discernible, and we know that these young people are going to change this continent moving forward in the future. And one of the extraordinary things is that they've erased the borders. They're using modern technology, and they're communicating across borders, and they're sharing ideas. And when I'm asked about whether this will have lasting power, I believe it's going to have lasting power not because of us. We provided tools for leadership for these young people. We gave them a platform, but they themselves will carry this platform forward in the future, and it will be a major part of the president's legacy in Africa. And again, I'm confident that it will have staying power. In 2014, President Obama held the first ever U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. It was a productive 3-day dialogue between African heads of state and U.S. leaders. We are still hearing from African leaders how much they appreciated the opportunity to engage with senior leaders in the United States. The summit's success will have benefits from years to come, and we're being asked if the next administration will host a leaders summit, and that certainly will be among our recommendations for the next administration. Last year, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act was reauthorized for an additional 10 years. AGOA allows African companies to export over 6,500 products to the U.S. duty-free every year. This was huge news for Africa. African non-oil exports under AGOA have more than quadrupled since it began in 2000. Africans see the benefit, and they know that they can benefit more from AGOA. And it was a heavy lift that required the work not just of us in the State Department, but our African Diplomatic Corps, some of whom I see here today, as well as trade ministers from across Africa who lobbied on the Hill to ensure that this important legislation was passed. And then finally, nobody expected the Ebola outbreak in Africa, and you might be surprised that I put this among the good news stories, but the United States led the international response. We averted a major catastrophic epidemic, despite the fact that more than 10,000 people died. We contributed more than $2.3 billion, covering every facet of the response effort. It still raised some major challenges for us in the health sector in terms of the health infrastructure that we have to deal with in the future, but the fact that we were able to come together with the rest of the international community, as well as our African colleagues, bringing in a whole-of-government effort led by our colleagues at CDC, supported by our colleagues at USAID and the State Department, and certainly by the immense contribution that DOD made, we were able to stop this thing in its tracks. The president's trip last July to Kenya and Ethiopia was an extraordinary lift. And while he was in Kenya, he opened the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which gave entrepreneurs all over the world a boost to launch new business initiatives. And he followed this with his visit to Ethiopia, where he was the first U.S. president to speak at the African Union, with more than 2,000 people in the room from across the continent. And again, this visit is still paying dividends. We've made significant contributions in the realm of peace and security in Africa as well. The State Department's Africa Contingency Operations Training and Assistance Program. I see Charlie in the room. Charlie knows a lot about this program, was very much a part of the creation of this program. We're working very closely with AFRICOM. We've trained more than 27,000 African peacekeepers just this last year alone. We've trained more than 250,000 since the beginning of the program. And this is a program that has brought African peacekeepers to respond to areas of conflict where we've not been able to get other peacekeepers to respond, and they've supported efforts of the UN as well as AU missions across Africa. We're working with African countries now to get them to honor a commitment that they made to provide 25% of the cost of peacekeeping. This is going to be a challenge moving forward, but we think it's a great initiative, and we're hopeful that working with them and the UN and with their member states, that they are able to make this contribution moving ahead.